Hello, everyone. Welcome to another BNE podcast with me, Ben Harris, the editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews. Today, we're going to get away from doing perennial Russia-Ukraine podcasts and look at Uzbekistan, which has come to an exciting stage in the privatization program, where the state is rolling out a string of the first big IPOs. The stakes on offer are going to be small, but this is really a revolutionary moment where the state's now actively trying to get out of the economy and hand it over to private enterprise. I have a distinguished lineup of guests today, starting with Karen Sarapolonov, sorry, I'm tripping over my tongue, who is the managing director of Avesta, which is one of Central Asia's leading brokerages and investment banks. We're also joined by Behruz Olshilov, who's an investment banker in Tashkent with Freedom Finance. That has an interesting story. It started off in Russia, then headquarters in Kazakhstan before moving to New York, where it's listed, and a specialist in investment banking across Eurasia, Central Asia. We're also joined by Eleanor Kramer. She's the head of IR at Artel, which is Central Asia's biggest white goods manufacturer and probably one of the top 3 leading companies in Uzbekistan and probably the #1 privately owned enterprise in the country. And finally, we're joined by Aziz Solidkov, who's from the Ministry of Finance, and he's the head of IPO creation in Uzbekistan and is the point man for driving this whole campaign to privatize using the local stock markets. So to begin with, I think we go to Aziz, who says to make some introductory remarks as a representative of the government and the program that's just going. We just heard some exciting news that UzAuto, one of our 3 companies, has just announced its pricing. So the flag is waved, the race has begun. But Aziz, please, tell us what's going on. What's the plan here?
Good afternoon and good evening. Nice to meet you all today. Thank you for giving the opportunity to speak about the local capital market of Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan continues to be strong in its transition to a more market economy. The country is committed to improving its productive capacity and just on the way to sustainable economy. So numerous economies, state-owned enterprise and banking sector reform. Now that this country has entered the next phase of market reforms, be fundamental for further market liberalization. Work to this is creating a more competitive and efficient corporate sector by transforming SOEs and SOBs, as well as pushing forward on privatization. Perhaps most promising for the country's future is the ambitious program being undertaken to expand its local capital market. By strengthening the equity market, the country affordable capital will ultimately become accessible to companies across all industry sectors. In this sense, the government of Uzbekistan, with a strong commitment, is initiating local and national IPOs or SPOs of 23 national champions over the next 2 years. Out of these 23 SOEs, there are 6 of them are state-owned banks and 5 insurance and financial companies, 3 metals and mining representatives, and the rest are SOEs that are operating in the oil and gas, transportation, logistics, automobile manufacturing, and pharmaceutical industry. And the pioneers of such wide-scale IPO agenda are UzAuto, UzMetKombint, and Tashkent. Now, the development of the capital market is the management of the Ministry of Finance. From perspective of capital market development, we will focus more on the local listings. However, pre-IPO and IPO preparation processes will be based on the international best practices and standards, which will allow us to properly prepare for international listings that will be being followed later on. Thank you.
Great. As I said in the intro, that the 3 companies that are up for IPO are UzAuto, which is the biggest car producer. It was formerly, originally, it was a joint venture with Daewoo, but then got taken over by GM, the American company. And then more recently, GM pulled out, and so now it's fully state-owned. And the bizarre thing, if you go to Tashkent, is the entire country seems to be full of Chevrolets, and they're all white. They're all produced by this one factory, which has a 95% market share. But now it's being privatized and should be very interesting, and going through various reforms, and the protectionist duties that it's enjoyed till now have been taken down in order to spur competition. The second company is UzMetKombint, which is the country's largest steel producer. I think a third of the steel in the country is consumed is UzMet. And the third company is QQB, which is a former agricultural-based bank, but is now transformed to a universal bank and is the country's largest mortgage lender. And happily, Karin and Behruz, between them, are representing and helping to prepare all three of those companies. So, Behruz, maybe we can go to you first, in so much as you said, there's a capital markets day going on at the moment for UzAuto, and they've just announced the pricing, which is going to be a key element, as I think we'll discuss, to get these IPOs away. They've got to be cheap enough in order to bring in fresh capital. But can you tell us a bit about UzAuto and the pricing? I think it's just been valued at 2.8 billion, and we were talking before this started. You're saying that's actually at the low end of the scale. That's quite a cheap valuation, which is a good thing, is it not?
Yeah, so we valued UzAuto at $2.18 billion. So that's the fair value, and we're placing it at the discount range of 10 to 20%. So,
and the company itself, I mean, to go into a little bit of detail, I was at your presentation at the Economic Forum. I mean, it really is a force in the market, in so much as it produced something like 280,000 cars last year. It's on course
300. Yeah, now it produces about 340,000 cars. UzAuto Motors is the largest automotive producer in CIS. And it operates with the GM. So in alliance with GM, produces Chevrolet cars. It holds over 90% of the market share in Uzbekistan, over 40% market share in Kazakhstan, rapidly pushing into new markets in the post-Soviet republics. One of the best parts about the company is because of its alliance with GM, it doesn't have to spend anything on R&D. So it will be growing much faster, and will have much better margins than any other automotive company at the same size. So also it has the exclusive rights from GM to sell Chevrolets in those post-Soviet republics. So no one else can import Chevrolets other than UzAuto Motors to Kazakhstan, to Armenia, to Kyrgyzstan, etc.
And it's got two big drivers of growth. One is the low cost base. I mean, there's a big factory in Andijan that was set up there in the 90s, and then Karimov did that as one of the few really good deals he did. And the second one is the population growth. That Uzbekistan has got the fastest growing population. So from 400,000 production predicted for this year is expected to rise to 500,000. And that's simply because there's more people need to buy cars. I mean, what's the outlook there?
Yeah, it's not just that there are more people, but also that the GDP per capita is growing. Right now, if you look at the correlation metrics of the owning of cars, car ownership per 1,000 people, there is just 87 people per 1,000 people owning cars in Uzbekistan. That's much lower than Kyrgyzstan, which has double of that. It's lower than in Turkmenistan, in Armenia, in many post-Soviet republics. Russia is at about 400 cars per 1,000 people. So our projections is that UzAuto will, the car ownership in Uzbekistan will move to 140 cars per 1,000 people, and that will allow UzAuto Motors to produce much more, to have a bigger market for its cars.
We did a drill down into the car ownership. I mean, you have to take into account, looking at the numbers, also the age of the car. And Russia has a high proportion of cars per capita, but then a lot of them are quite old. Although it still has, from the CIS, it has a very high share of new cars. But Uzbekistan must have extremely high share of new cars.
Yeah, so actually, UzAuto Motors numbers from basically the models, they went from average of 11 years per model, so to 4 years in the forecast for the next year. So that will be the average age of the models they produce. So those are all freshly new approved models from GM.
And a last question before we get on to the more general topics. What about the financial performance of the company? As I said, it has this local production, and in the presentation, the deputy chairman was saying that, look, we have a very competitive position because, and this is another one of Uzbekistan's strengths, is that the cost of labor here is very low, and that we can produce cars much cheaper than any imports that come in. We can really, compete on price and cost. But the company itself is pretty profitable, is it not?
Yeah, the company is pretty profitable. It earned $215 million for the last 12 months, and we're projecting a lot of growth to 2026, 2027. So right now, basically right now, the company is earning about $3.5 billion in revenue, and we're projecting $5.3 billion in revenue by 2026. That's thanks to introducing more models, so newer models, and to replacing low margin models with higher margin ones.
Okay. Karen, if I can come to you, can we do the same with UzMetKombint, which again, as I say, it's a huge plant that was set up in the 40s, and it's had at least $1 billion invested in it since the end of the Soviet Union, and has gone from just making sort of basic steel to adding new products like gases, and now it's moving on to hot rolled steel from long products, which are much more marketable. And the output is expected to double from 1 million tons a year to 2 million, if I remember rightly. Tell me a bit about this company, why it's so interesting for an IPO.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben, for invitation and giving the chance to give you a big description about the company. More or less the same is very the same for the UzMetKombint. What Bihru said, macroeconomically, it's a great company. It's supported by the growing income and highly growing construction segment in Uzbekistan, because they could sell everything they produce like 3 times on the local market, and the prices are quite transparent on the local commodity exchange. Everything is very transparent for all the sides of the project. They don't have the issues with the getting money from the payers, which is quite usual for local and companies in CIS. These guys, they are getting money strictly from the commodity exchange for most of their products. As you said, the probable company now producing the long products like rebars and others, and the grinding balls for the another mining companies in Uzbekistan, and now they are increasing the capacity by 2.5 times, and not just in that area that they are doing, but adding the hot rolling flat metal, which will be then galvanized and used for any industry in Uzbekistan, like FMCG production, some construction, whatever. So the company have great opportunities. They already practically guaranteed the financing of these great projects. So the main projects valued for 700 million, and definitely management have a lot of other plans of modernization the plant, but it's definitely they are limited with the size and some financial covenants. If it just you to imagine the $700 million projects is more or less their annual revenues right now. But when the project was starting, they have like twice lower revenue. So they actually supposed to do the project, which is 2 times more than they now. So this is the advantage that Uzbek companies could have in this growing market. So they could afford very prospective projects. What else to that? So we did some very basic calculations now, and we see that the price for the UzMetKombint shares now is more or less the same the dynamics. So it's practically 100% correlated with their profit dynamics. In 2021, there was a very good increase in prices for the metal. They had good profits. Now it's a bit lower. That's like a risk for all cyclical seasonal products. But on the other hand, we see that all the efforts of the management of the company to improve the reporting, to improve the corporate governance, to improve the quality and cost of the production. But all this is not reflected in the price. So we see that the IPO will bring additional liquidity to the market, will bring some additional qualified investors who will be able to do the proper understanding of this values, and this will transfer in a much better pricing for the shares.
Mm-hmm. Could you also give us a brief sketch of QQB? I mean, again, as I know, it's like one of the top 10 banks and formerly a specialist on the agricultural sector, where it's sort of getting into housing. And now, as part of the new strategy, is transforming it to a universal bank, but it's kept that interest in housing, and it's the largest mortgage lender. And the mortgage sector, the housing sector, I mean, it's an economic growth driver. You mentioned construction's booming, and the expanding population, there's a constant demand for housing, and the government is subsidizing mortgages too in order to drive this along and to make housing affordable for all the young people. And so the bank sits in quite a sweet spot.
For sure, yeah. I guess the one of the main metrics, as Cruz was telling you about the penetration of the cars to the 1,000 people, I could say that Uzbekistan have one of the lowest average residential space per capita. It's just about less than 17 square meters. So obviously that these numbers will be growing, and the current growth in construction is confirming this growth. So the bank itself is probably one of the most profitable and well-managed banks among the state-owned banks. Definitely, we honestly could say that there's two universe of the banks: the private banks in Uzbekistan and the state-owned banks. But for last 4 years, the bank did a very good job on cleaning the balance sheet, improving the procedures, introducing the IT and new management strategy. So everything of this turns in a decreasing of the costs, increasing of the net margin. So the bank is now showing about 18% ROE and growing very fast. So the only limit for them is their capital adequacy ratio and the requirements of the central bank, which is quite tough in Uzbekistan. But with the possible IPO, yes, they raise very small sum, but it opens the window for another types of the equity injections to the equity. So we hope it will help the bank to grow much faster. Mm-hmm. And returning to the idea about their significant 27% share on the mortgage market, it's huge. Even the market is not so big itself, but this project gives them the opportunity to do the good cross sales and to work with the clients for a long-term perspective. If someone have the mortgage loan from the bank, it most probably will transfer all the salaries, all the banking services to this bank, and moreover, his parents, his child, they all will go to the same bank to get the loan for their own house. So this is even this program is the subsidized project, and they might be not doing the huge profits from this directly, but it's the pathway to the additional services, additional clientele, and they could improve it. So with the new products, with the new know-how from the advisors, which they are, it's definitely a way to the more commercialized banking activity of the QQB.
Okay. Ellie, if I can turn to you now, I mean, the point of this privatization, I mean, is to transfer the ownership of these companies to private investors. However, these IPOs, I mean, they're starting with very small stakes, and the liquidity on the market, the local, the TSE, the Tashkent Stock Exchange, is very limited. So that obviously this process is going to take a long time, years. The other part of doing IPOs is to improve the transparency and the corporate governance and the general management of the companies. The goal here is to make them publicly accountable. I talked to George Papashvili, who's the new head of the new CEO of the TSE, and he was suggesting one of the ways that this privatization could be done is giving the workers shares as a bonus to get them personally invested in the future of the company. And also the company itself is then publicly accountable because it has to go through the reporting process. It has to answer to shareholders, albeit they minority ones. And Artel has not done an IPO, but you have recently issued, I think it's the first big corporate bonds or one of the biggest on the market. And so you've had to go through this whole transparency, corporate governance, restructuring to be, you know, on a par with international standards, reporting on a corporate, on a capital market to investors into your bonds. I mean, can you describe a little bit, you know, what that meant? I mean, I know talking to you before that it's actually meant quite a lot of work and they have to get their heads around it, but what did that actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, for those that don't know Artel, we're a huge, or a very large manufacturer of home appliances here in Uzbekistan and also within Central Asia. And you're completely right. I think we have, obviously we're in a very different position. We're a 100% private company. And what a lot of people don't know is that before, I think it was 2019 tax reforms, companies like ours couldn't grow above a certain size. So actually we were several companies all kind of linked together, basically correlating to various geographical or geographical kind of locations or areas of expertise. And so it was only after 2019 that we could consolidate our entities and then bring in what we would say modern corporate governance practices into Artel Electronics LLC, what became the holding group above it. And yeah, I mean, that consolidation process took at least 18 months, just legally going through that process. And then following that, but it was only following that we were able to, you know, account for ourselves professionally for the first time. So to kind of have a set of consolidated accounts that we could then get audited for, you know, the 3 years, and that was done last year. And then off the back of that, we can get, you know, a Fitch rating and can do get a Fitch rating and can refinance internationally and issue a bond on the local stock exchange. And then in terms of corporate governance, you know, we've been able to bring in a supervisory board and audit committees and all of the things that go with that. It's not been without its challenges, of course. I mean, there are, you know, it's a very new thing to the market and to Artel. So slowly people are getting used to it. I mean, even on a basic level, kind of trying to organize regular meetings in Uzbekistan can be difficult. But, you know, slowly that culture is becoming embedded in the company. And I think we're seeing, or Artel is seeing huge kind of positive impact from investing early in that process.
So you've already put into place something like IFRS international accounts, and the first ones are coming out. They're out already, or are they coming out soon?
No, last year, so 2021. So we had our first 3 years worth of consolidated.
Right. And the group has got very big. I remember going through this process in Russia in the early 2000s. And one of the things the managers were saying to me is that, look, we've got to a size now where corporate governance is not just something nice that we want to show to foreign investors. It's become essential as a business process. You know, we have to internally clamp down on corruption and so and you know, malpractices and inefficiency as well. So just measuring the performance of the business. And so we need transparent, believable accounts for ourselves. And that, I think, the big companies in Uzbekistan, yourself included, or maybe as a leading example, have reached that point where you've got so large that you need to have all these international things in there simply for the sake of management, for running the company efficiently. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think completely. So it's not just you don't just do it to tick a kind of ESG box. I think one benefits not only because you're hitting those metrics that investors and financial institutions are looking for, but you're also internally internally you have better oversight, or at least when you have these committees and supervisory boards and things, you have better oversights of what is going on and what is effective, and it allows you to plan strategically more effectively as well.
Mm-hmm. Can I open the same question up to everyone, to all four of you, in so much as this is a key part of this privatization drive? It's not simply to, put private investors in charge of these companies, because that's going to be a long, slow process. It's also a process of improving transparency and governance and accountability. And one of the complaints you hear in Uzbekistan is, despite all the reforms and the progressive ideas that the government's introduced, that the state does stay in control, and you want to get away from the ability of someone being able to pick up the telephone and order something to happen, because now these companies are accountable to shareholders. And so that actually sort of slows that process down. I mean, with the three companies, UzAuto and UzMetKombint, I mean, they are, former, well, in UzMet's case, I mean, it's a former Soviet company, sort of run on red directors line, and UzAuto is a modern company, but nevertheless was established under Karimov and very, very much run directly by the state. And this process with the IPO is supposed to change that. Well, what's happened in those three companies in terms of improving transparency, accountability, reporting, corporate governance? Karen, do you want to go first? Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I can start with, UzAuto Motors. I'd say that UzAuto Motors is very different from any other SOE IPOs that will come soon. Why? Because UzAuto Motors is not owned by a government, it's owned by the UzAuto Passenger Vehicle Management, which is owned by the UzAuto Sanoat, which is then owned by Ministry of Finance. So there are multiple layers of ownership. Mm-hmm. And so the decisions are not brought directly by government. That's the first thing. And second, about the transformation process of the accountability and other things. UzAuto Motors has issued Eurobonds before last year. So they are doing the IFRS twice a year. And UzAuto Motors is actually one of the few companies that are doing actually doing accounting in IFRS, and not just converting the accounting from local standards to IFRS. Right. So they also have their international ratings, B+. So they have financial covenants which come from Eurobonds, as well as their reporting and covenants, and they are actually on the way to deliver their first ESG report by the end of this year.
Right. And Karen, is it the same with the other two, the bank and the UzMet?
Yeah, the same good direction and the way for improving, but definitely a bit different for each one. For example, the UzMetKombint, they have a new management team, including few expats on the key positions. They have they just got the Fitch rating. They are working constantly with the foreign financial institutions like big ones, expert agencies like Sachi, like Hermes, who will be financing the projects. So it requires a lot of efforts on improving the ESG agenda, the financial positions, the quality of the management. They have definitely all of them. Three companies have the IFRS reporting, and UzMet is going to do the first ESG rating as well. Maybe not so fast as UzAuto, but definitely maybe this year, maybe in the beginning of the next one. And for the bank, I guess it's much better, because the banks already had the requirements to do the IFRS reporting since 1994. I guess might be wrong a bit, but still they are working with this for quite a long time. They are attracting the million of different credit lines from the foreign institutions, foreign banks, development institutions. The ADB is helping them. The AY wrote the strategy, and just an example, they have the majority of the independent board members in their supervisory board, and 3 of them are foreigners with a very good and deep background in the financing. So everything of this means that there is a very good improvement in the system in general.
Right.
Definitely, there is a huge part of the things which working in the old way, but the good thing is the management and the board and the owners, the shareholders, and the government, they all understand the problems and they are doing the step-by-step process to solve this issue.
Okay. Aziz, if I can turn to you, I mean, from the government point of view, because at the end of the day, these SOEs are very much owned by the state, and this process is right at the very beginning. But the state's attitude is to get out, and that you want to see all of these transparency, corporate governance improve, as you see it as a way of developing the economy. I mean, well, what's the vision of the government in terms of these privatizations?
You know, the IPOs and SPOs are one of the most privatized assets. Doing and going through this and this project, the state-owned companies, banks, of course, in corporate governance will lead to improvement in financial. And as a regulator of capital markets, we are interested in this because in our market there will be more companies who are listed for investors and the more high quality assets investors. And on the other side, if the companies management and governance for all, they will be kind of more efficient in their financial performance. They will less require kind of financial.
Okay. So you're breaking out your sound a little bit, but I got most of that to produce more high quality assets, help development of the capital market, and at the same time improve the management performance of the companies. But then that brings us on to the key question here, is that these IPOs, people are talking about around 5% of each going to be offered on the Tashkent Exchange to predominantly retail investors. And just looking at the UzAuto valuation of 2.8 billion, the amount of money that's going to be needed to get 5% away is quite kind of large. And the trouble with the Uzbek equity market is that there's not really very many retail investors. I mean, Karen and Bergruz, you both have brokerages, you do have local clients, but given you've got 3 pretty large IPOs coming at once, is there enough liquidity on the market? Is there enough money amongst retail investors to afford this? I forget who told me, I think it might have been Karen or Pavlishvili, that if all the investors, the retail investors, sold their entire portfolio to go into cash to get ready for these IPOs, they could probably cover the UzAuto issue twice over. And what that means is that in order to get these IPOs away, you're going to actually have to, Uzbekistan or the TSE is going to have to attract new liquidity from retail investors. In other words, people are going to take some of the 5 billion they've got in savings under the mattress out and put them into equities. How much of an issue is the liquidity? And does it mean that they won't get 5% away? They might get 2% away or 1% away. What's the plan here?
Yeah, so the plan is we are actually doing it. All those IPOs have up to 5%, it's not necessarily 5%.
Mm-hmm.
For UzAuto IPO, UzAuto Motors IPO, we decided that we're doing at least $30 million, and we'll see how the book goes. So it's up from $30 million of volume to up to $98 million. So as for the liquidity goes,
yeah, is there that much money? Is there 30 to 90 million?
Currently, I don't really think so that there is so much money in the existing brokerage accounts. But the thing is, there hasn't been much going on in the Uzbek capital markets before those IPOs. The most exciting companies we had are there were just a couple of companies, the UzMetKombint, which didn't have much of the free float, and the commodity exchange, which also didn't have much of the free float. So we only had just like a couple blue chips. So there hasn't been many investors coming to the market. So with those real blue chips coming to list to IPO, we think that we'll have much more liquidity. So as for UzAuto, for example, UzAuto Motors, for example, we think that our brokerage account, retail brokerage accounts amount will triple during this IPO. So, and that's just for retail accounts. And as for institutional demand, there hasn't been any real institutional demand for previous public offerings, but for those offerings, we see now and then a lot of emails and requests to have a call coming. So institutional investors are interested in these IPOs. So as you know,
you're talking about international institutional investors or
yes,
local?
Yes,
right.
International and local. So as you know, and the largest equity offering, public equity offering so far has been just $1.5 million. That has been the SPO of Quartz, and we were underwriting the deal. So it wasn't enough to test the real liquidity of the market, let's say.
Right.
Yeah,
Karen,
and yeah.
Tell me, Karen, the QQB and the UzMetKombint, cash-wise, how much cash is the share, the 5% stake worth, or do you have a minimum as well that you're trying to get?
Yeah, we have this up to 5 thing, and I guess Bruce was right. We will see on existing demand and decide how much we want to sell. I probably cannot say you the exact numbers, but probably UzMet might be somewhere closer to 25-30 million, and QQB is very small, about maximum 10 million probably, because we all understand how illiquid the market is, especially for the banking shares. We have some infrastructure products which is going to be solved in the future. But still, we think that the local investors will actively participate, but at the same time, the main part of the placement might be considered to be allocated to the foreign institutional investors, because we see on the practice all the names that Bruce mentioned, the commodity exchange, other companies. First 2 years when the companies was growing very fast, most of the trades was done by the foreign institutions, and then when the people saw that there is a growth, there is some opportunity and additional profits comparing to the bank deposits, they started to invest locally. So the foreigners is a very important part of this process, especially institutionals, some hedge funds. We understand that the big guys will not come so at this point, but small frontier-oriented hedge funds is a very good and very target investments group for us.
So it is possible then. So adding that up, that sounds to me like, you know, the total starting package for the 3 companies is something on the order of 70 million, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of money for international investors, even though it's probably absorbed all of the liquidity from the domestic retail investors. And there are funds working on the Uzbek market. I mean, there's AFC Capital, and Karen, through your Avesta, you've got people who've invested directly as well. And some of the big international banks like JP Morgan have representative offices in Tashkent. But at the moment, those big international famous investment banks are largely focused on doing corporate bonds with the big Eurobond business with the large blue chips. They're not. They're not offering, you know, frontier market equity investments at this stage, are they? That's either of you, yeah.
Yeah, definitely all these big banks and big investments companies, they all looking for Uzbekistan. They are interested, they like the companies, but they have their own compliance and requirements on the size of the fees that they want to get. So it's difficult now to have all the big players here. So we are going to our partners, including foreign ones, and we will be cooperating on the local market with other brokerage to maximally consolidate the market and increase the possible demand for each of these IPOs going to be in the next few months or the years. So it's a challenge, but it's very realistically we could do it very successfully. So just need to have a bit of the courage to cover everything. That's a huge and difficult word, but it's definitely worth it, and we believe that the market will be very successful.
Aziz, if I can ask you, I mean, you know, as the IPO creation department at the Minfin, have you actually been actively wooing international investors, going to frontier funds, talking to big London, New York-based investment banks and offering them, hey, we're doing an IPO, this should be very interesting. We're going to offer them at discounts and these companies are fast growing, like, why don't you come and participate?
Yeah, sure. As a Minister of Finance, we usually do with strong investor relations with investment banks like Raiffeisen Bank and other frontier market investment funds. In May this year, we made organized non-deal roadshow banner in London, where we presented UzAuto and UzMetKombint. Yeah, and together with our the colleagues from that SOEs, we presented the plans for IPOs to international investors.
International investors,
and we got quite feedback from them, positive. And given that the let's say adverse effect of the geopolitical situation, national capital markets, particularly in equity markets, so at the moment we only focus on local listings. But of course, in coming years, maybe we're also planning international IPOs of some SOEs.
Eli, can I ask you about that? Because I know Artel, I mean, they've done corporate bonds already on the TSE in Tashkent, but I understand the ambition is to go and do a Eurobond. And what's your experience of reaching out internationally, and to what extent are you finding there's interest from the international audience? Because the plan here with the IPOs is to do SBOs and go to the international markets. And so this whole exercise is basically a calling card ahead of that effort, which is going to develop in the next few years. And you're in the same boat, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. We were targeting a Eurobond either next year or the year after. I think that was our kind of realistic aim. Obviously, since February, for obvious reasons, we're playing by ear a little bit because of the market. However, you know, people are very interested in stories from Uzbekistan. I think people are seeing nowadays very few kind of untapped markets where there's a huge amount of potential for growth. So we, as a company, we have seen that the doors to kind of like, you know, investors and banks and people have been completely open, and we've been able to have those conversations very early on, and that's saying that there is interest, obviously, for I mean, as I said, market conditions aren't quite right for it, and we also need to strengthen. I think Artel needs to grow a little bit more before it issues a bond. Obviously, our target is London at some point, but we successfully issued a small bond, and we were the first private, or the first 100% private company. I mean, Karen can correct me if I'm wrong, but we were the first large-scale private company to do so in Tashkent, and that went really well. And but again, that's on the domestic market, so we've got to. I think we've got to wait and see, basically.
To what extent do you think, like, Uzbekistan, I mean, famously when Mirziyoyev came in 2016, and he opened the market up again after, you know, Karimov had it shut down. And I think by 2018, it started to become very clear that this was a good idea, that Uzbekistan was taking off, that you come to Tashkent. I was down there then, and there was a noticeable buzz. And I was just down there again, like last week, 2 weeks ago. And you can feel it's coming on. I mean, it's going, and I think the story is getting out slowly that, you know, it's a very prospective market. And as you say, I think it's one of the few really upbeat stories in the whole former Soviet Union space. But to what extent do you think that is transmitted outside, that people are starting to wake up and say, oh, we have to keep an eye on this? It's actually very early days, but this should be very interesting if it goes the way that the other markets have gone.
I think over the last year or so that has really come through, because it's very easy for a kind of administration to come in and say they're going to reform and change everything, but actually people were kind of, you know, sitting back and seeing whether that process was real. And now I think it's very clear that it is real, and, you know, the government are very, very committed to the privatization process. I think, like any of these things, it's not necessarily a smooth journey. You know, there's kind of like, you kind of test different things out, you see what works, you see what doesn't work. But I think the interest, we've definitely seen it over the last year. We're getting more people knocking on our doors, more people getting in contact, more people expressing interest. And I think, and that's not just from a kind of financing perspective, but also from a partnership perspective, from a supply, you know, perspective. And I think it's because people now have trust in the process in a way that a couple of years ago they were probably sitting back and just, you know, letting it take its course and see whether the government would follow through with what it was saying it wanted to do.
Okay, look, we're coming in towards the end. I want to ask a last question about the IPO process. The key one, Mark Gabin has brought it up in the questions, and I am looking at them. I'll see if there's time for answer more of these questions. But the pricing of these IPOs is going to be key. The point being that you've got to, of course, the stakeholders want to take out as much money as they can, but at the same time, the issuer has to leave enough money on the table, particularly for the retail investors, so they see some upside. Because if they don't make money out of this, then that will scupper the whole privatization thing and development of the domestic stock market from the beginning. And I think everybody has at the back of their mind what happened to the Russian bank VTB when they did their People's IPO, and then within 12 months it tanked, and those shares are still half the price of what they were at the IPO, and the Russian retail investors put $1 billion into that IPO and got burnt. And that's weighed on the Russian stock market ever since. It's taken 25 years until the Russian retail investors finally were convinced to start investing into the stock market, which really took off about 2 years ago. And again, they've now been burnt because of the war, and they've lost a lot of money. And so this issue with these initial pricings, given the how immature this market is, and how inexperienced the Uzbek retail investor is, that getting the pricing level right to leave some money on the table is key. I mean, maybe Beruz, we could start with you, because you were saying that the 2.8 valuation, and Karin as well, that you were offering a 10 to 20% discount, I think you said, that the pricing is going to be relatively attractive for these first rounds. And all said and done, I mean, they're offering relatively small chunks of shares, so I think you can afford to be generous. Isn't it worth investing at this stage in pricing at the low end to make sure that everybody who does do this gets a decent profit?
Yeah, so first of all, yeah, the pricing is 2.18 billion, not 2.8. And we're placing it with a discount range of 10 to 20%. And as for the knowledge of retail investors, we as a company are doing about 100 investor education events annually in Uzbekistan. And
that's like a domestic roadshow where you're going around villages and towns and just inviting regular people in to tell them about what an IPO is and the advantages of equity.
Yeah, what the stock market is and how to invest in the stock market. So we're doing about 100 of those events annually. We're doing this. We're the only brokerage with an extensive with an extensive offices network, which is spread across all of the country. So we're doing these these education events in all of the regions of Uzbekistan. And of course, when there is an IPO or a bond offering, we're doing simultaneously, we're doing the investor education events. So after they are educated, we are telling about the offering, so then they know what they're investing in.
Karen, same for you. I mean, you're going to bring these IPOs out at a cheap price?
Yeah, so don't have the valuations yet, so we are just in the process, but we probably will be targeting not something like discount of this from the value or something. We will look on the prices that we think that the market will accept. And we are looking for successful IPO, not just in terms of placing the shares and forget about this. We are aiming to that type of the IPO which will be successful in the long term. So all investors will have a chance to get the profits. So we will very conservatively evaluate the future of these companies and provide the maximum information to them. So we want that this IPOs will be very successful, everyone got the profit, and then invite others to join the party. Because we have, as Aziz was telling us, we have 21 companies to go in next year or so. So these 3 ones should open the trailblazers for the market.
Because if you're selling it to international investors, you don't need to offer a discount. The story is like, this is a frontier market and that this is a good company and just the future growth is going to give you maximum.
Just foreigners will not allow us to do the one type of the IPO I told you. Foreigners will mostly keep it for next, let's say, 5 years. So it's not adding the liquidity to the market. So this is the challenge for us to do the proper allocation between the institutional investors, which will give us the volume of the placements, and the retail, local, institutional, foreign investors who will be trading the shares tomorrow, who will be buying this, selling this every day to promote. Like the key is the liquidity. Now we see that the liquidity is very low on the market, and we want with this IPOs to increase it like 5-10 times at least.
I'm just scrolling through the questions in the last 5 minutes, and one point someone brought up was that the market remains, despite the opening up that Mirziyoyev has brought in, the market remains pretty closed. And someone like UzAuto has benefited because they're very high duties, I think 100% duties on the import of other cars. And although at the presentation, the deputy director was saying that the tariffs duties have been reduced and twice already, and there's going to be another reduction in January. And so the market's being opened up for more competition. This is still very early days in the whole process and in Uzbekistan's transformation. And something like UzAuto enjoys something of a monopoly and a protected monopoly. And the government is putting through reforms very fast, but you know, there's still big problems like this. And there's at the economic forum, I heard one investor was asking, you know, all right, it was UzAuto has a virtual monopoly now, but eventually, if those tariffs are taken off, what will happen then? Is this really such a good investment? Because to what extent is it really a sort of self-contained, vertically integrated company?
Yeah, so
Cruz, what do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I can address this question. There are no protective tariff. There is no government protection on UzAuto motors whatsoever. The current system in Uzbekistan is done so that any company, any automotive company, can come to Uzbekistan and localize the production here, so that they'll have the same opportunities as UzAuto motors in this market. The tariffs on imports of new cars are will possibly be reduced in the future by half, but even if they are removed completely, even if they're removed completely, if you import the new cars, the new other manufacturers will be faced with will face competition with UzAuto Motors' extensive dealership network, the abilities of UzAuto Motors to supply the auto parts 24/7 across all of the regions of the country. And other other car makes can wait months for the required parts to come to replace. So there are over 150,000 people working in all of the auto parts making companies in the UzAuto Sanoat network, which then supply those parts to UzAuto Motors. So
No, and
it's not easy. Yes, it's not easy to build that.
Yeah. Extensive service network too, 200. I mean, that's key. That's important to everyone, is being able to get your car fixed. But
so it will take years to compete with UzAuto if one wants to enter the market.
No, exciting. I'm sort of very curious to see what happens. Very last parting thoughts. We only have a few minutes left, but so if everyone, if you have something to say, a short comment. But I think all the companies, Artel included, is setting up a factory in Kazakhstan. UzAuto now has significant number of its cars are sold in Kazakhstan, and this is one of the really exciting prospects, is the regional integration. And Kazakhstan is the obvious place to go because it's by far the richest of the other stands, twice or 2.5 times richer than Uzbekistan itself. But to what extent is the region now finally coming together after all those years of rivalry between the various presidents? There's a new guard in charge, and that as a larger market, it's much more interesting, and it now sits once again, like it did in Victorian times, at a strategic crossroads between East and West, when East and West means something again. So to what extent is Central Asia becoming this one market? Because everyone's business plan is looking like that. Don't know, Ellie, I mean, you're actually actively, or were actively, going to build a vacuum cleaner factory in Kazakhstan. Are those plans still going ahead?
Those plans are currently on hold, but we're looking at other options at the moment. But no, we are both exporting and working with various partners in other regions. Other countries in the region. And I think for us, I can't necessarily speak to the geopolitics, but at least for us, I mean, we're finding that logistically investing in and working with Uzbekistan allows you very, very easy access to the rest of the region. And I think, I mean, we're a home appliance manufacturer, right? And we're the biggest in the region, which means for us, it's quite easy and easy to penetrate those markets. But I think we are seeing a kind of growth in regional trade, and I think it's a really positive thing for Uzbekistan.
Right, and it's go ahead.
Yeah, as for UzAuto Motors, it's not just doing like you've asked about the regional integration. So as for UzAuto Motors, it's not just doing the SUP sales in other CIS countries. It has already built semi-knock-down production in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, and it is planning to do so in Turkmenistan and in Kyrgyzstan, and is looking to expand into the Middle East. So
when I was first in Uzbekistan in '95, I mean, that's the investors were all coming there first. I mean, this is before Kazakhstan made all its money from oil, and because it's the natural production center for the whole of the 5 stands. It's the only one that has a border with all the others, and it has the largest population by far. So you can build your production and then export to the neighboring countries. Isn't that one of the appeals of this that will drive the growth even faster? Karen, what do you think?
Yeah, the market might be growing much faster here now because, as mentioned during the economic forum, we see the start of the structural reforms. For example, a very small example. No one noted it. For 9 months in third quarter, the non-gold export from Uzbekistan the first time exceeded the growth rates of the import. So all this previous 5 years of the significant import, which was half, is the machineries. at least turning to the starting of the production of the export-oriented products. So we was importing the equipment, which now started to work. And in future, the gap between the import and export will be much more narrow, and we'll have a smaller trade deficit. So this is the one very, very top line example of how the country is changing. So we could speak for hours for each of the segments, which is going through this the very similar process.
Great. Guys, we've run out of time. We had our hour. I'd like to thank you very much, everyone, Behruz, Karen, Ellie, and Aziz for joining us. Very interesting. I'm super curious to see how these IPOs go, and even if they don't go that well, I mean, just the mere start and the preparation that's gone into doing it will lead to more corporate bonds, Euro bonds, what have you, and the development. I mean, it's a long, long road. Looking around the region, watching the development of the other countries, it's taken a decade, and I think Uzbekistan is still at the very early stages of that, but it's definitely stepped off square one and to square two. So once again, thank you all for participating. Fascinating conversation. And for viewers, if you want to see this again, or you want to share it with your friends, you can find a copy of the podcast on our YouTube channel, BNE IntelliNews. Also, if you go to bne.eu or IntelliNews.com/welcome, there you can find various other things. A link to the YouTube channel is there. You can also sign up for Editor's Picks, which is our free daily digest of our best stories from the last 24 hours. And if you're a professional and interested in finding out more about Uzbekistan, we report on it daily. You can then take a trial to our pro service, where we have that in 30 other countries, plus now all of Africa. So once again, thank you very much for spending the time, and I hope to see you again next time. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Thanks. All the best. Talk to you soon.